actions around the country. In Arizona, 3 people were arrested after marching onto the Davis-Monthan Air Base in Tucson. They attempted to hold a peace vigil against uranium bombing and armed drones before they were taken into custody. One of the 3, Gene Boucher, referenced Obama's post-shooting speech, saying, quote, President Obama's mandate when he spoke last week in Tucson that we should do everything we can to make sure this country lives up to our children's expectations compels me to act. I do not believe that constant war lives up to the expectations of our nation's children, the activist said. Peace activists also rallied outside the FBI building in Washington, D.C. To protest the targeting of anti-war and Palestine solidarity activists, as well as the imprisonment of alleged military whistleblower Bradley Manning. Kevin Zeese of the group Voters for Peace hailed Manning as a hero.
If we had real leadership in this country, rather than holding Bradley Manning in confinement, solitary confinement for the last 5 months, they would be standing with Bradley Manning and saying, Bradley Manning is showing us what we're doing. We need to rejudge our policy, rethink our foreign policy. We need to move to become a country that obeys the law, not one that violates the law. Bradley Manning has provided the American people an opportunity to know what their country is doing.
In another MLK Day protest, an estimated 1,000 people marched on the state capitol in South Carolina to protest the ongoing use of the Confederate flag. Meanwhile, in Maine, Republican Governor Paul LePage is under criticism for his handling of a Martin Luther King Day event invitation from the NAACP. LePage initially turned the invitation down, upsetting the group, but he drew even more controversy when he offered this response to the NAACP's reaction.
Tell them to kiss my butt. If they want to play the race card, come to dinner and my son will talk to them.
That is Maine Governor LePage. He later relented and attended the event. Wisconsin Republican Party Chair Reince Priebus has been elected the new head of the Republican National Committee. Priebus replaces Michael Steele, who aborted his bid for a second term after falling behind in early voting last week. Priebus has set a fundraising goal of $400 million in the next 2 years. It is said that President Obama is aiming to raise $1 billion for his reelection. The independent reporter, activist, and poet John Ross has died. John Ross covered social movements in Mexico and Latin America for nearly 50 years. He authored 10 books, including his latest, El Monstruo, Dread and Redemption in Mexico City. In a Democracy Now! Interview last April, John Ross talked about how he first came to the Mexican capital.
I went to Mexico in 1957 with a number of younger BPOs. We were much younger than the Jack Kerouacs and Allen Ginsbergs. We were about 15, well, not so much younger than Allen, but certainly than Kerouac and Burroughs. We were about 15 years younger. But we had contact with them in New York. I come from the village. I was born in the village, and my contact was always with poets and artists. And came to Mexico in 1957, returned in 1958, and I didn't go on the road. I mean, all the beats were always on the road. I came and stayed, and I lived for 7 years in a small indigenous village in the mountains of Michoacan. And truly, you know, I've been very close to the Zapatista movement during the last 16 years, and I could have not been close to the Zapatista movement if I hadn't spent so many years living in an indigenous community and understanding the dynamic of indigenous life in rural Mexico.
Poet, author, activist John Ross has died in Mexico. And a correction to an earlier headline, Arizona shooting victim James Eric Fuller shouted at Tea Party member Trent Humphreys after Humphreys, not Fuller, said any debate over gun control should resume after the slain victims' funerals. Fuller was arrested and remains in custody. You can go to our website, Democracy Now!, for our interview with Eric Fuller on Friday's broadcast, one day before his arrest. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. After break, we spend the rest of the hour talking about the revolt in Tunisia. Stay with us.
Bye.